There are things in life that don't hurt in the moment, but stay with you for years after. Not because they happened, but because you said too much about them. You trusted too easily, spoke too freely, and only later realized that some words don't just leave your mouth, they leave marks on your life. As you get older, you begin to see a pattern. It's not always what people do to you that causes damage. Sometimes, it's what you revealed that gave them the chance. We grow up being told to be honest, to express ourselves, to open up. And that sounds good in theory. But real life is more complicated than that. Not everyone deserves full access to your thoughts, your plans, your struggles. And not every truth needs to be spoken out loud. Wisdom, over time, starts to look less like expression and more like restraint. You begin to understand that silence is not weakness. It's control. It's protection. And in many cases, it's power. Let's start with the first thing most people learn too late. Keep your plans private. There's something exciting about having a vision for your life. A new idea, a fresh goal, something that feels meaningful and full of possibility. And naturally, you want to share it. You want someone to hear it and say it sounds like a great idea, that you should go for it. You're not even looking for approval, just a little encouragement. But what you often get instead is doubt, hesitation, or quiet disbelief. Not always because people want to hurt you, but because they see the world through their own limitations. You tell someone about your goal, and suddenly it's being examined, questioned, picked apart. They start pointing out risks you hadn't thought about, reminding you of past failures, suggesting safer paths. And little by little, that excitement you once felt begins to fade. What started as a clear vision becomes clouded with uncertainty. You start second-guessing yourself, not because the idea changed, but because too many voices got involved. There's also something happening inside your own mind when you talk too much about your plans. The moment you say it out loud, your brain feels a sense of progress, almost like you've already taken action. It gives you a small reward just for talking about it. And strangely, that can reduce the urgency to actually do the work. You feel good about the idea without having to face the effort it requires. That's why some of the most successful people move quietly. They don't announce what they're building. They don't explain every step they're about to take. They focus on execution, not validation. And when the results finally show, there's nothing left for others to question or interfere with. By then, it's already real. Keeping your plans private doesn't mean you're being secretive in a negative way. It means you're protecting something that isn't strong enough yet to withstand outside pressure. Early ideas are fragile. They need space, focus, and belief. And the more people you expose them to, the more likely they are to be shaped or shaken by opinions that were never meant to guide your life. So instead of explaining what you're going to do, just do it. Let your actions speak later. Not everything needs an audience in the beginning. Some things grow better in silence. And once you start understanding that, you begin to see how the same principle applies to another sensitive area, your money. Keep your finances hidden. Money is one of those topics that seems harmless to talk about, especially when things are going well. You might feel proud of what you've built, of how far you've come, of the discipline it took to get there. And there's nothing wrong with that feeling. But the moment you start sharing details, the dynamic between you and others can shift in ways you didn't expect. People don't always react to your financial situation with the same mindset you have. Some may feel inspired, but others may feel uncomfortable or even resentful. And sometimes, they begin to see you differently, not as a person, but as a resource. It's subtle at first. A small request here, a favor there. Then it becomes more frequent, more direct, more assumed. You might tell yourself that helping others is the right thing to do. And it is when it comes from a place of choice, not pressure. But when people know you have something, they may start expecting access to it. And saying no becomes harder, because now it's not just about money, It's about relationships, guilt, and obligation. Over time, this can wear you down. Not just financially, but emotionally. You start questioning whether people value you for who you are or for what you can provide. Conversations feel different. Invitations feel different. Even small interactions carry an unspoken weight. There's also the issue of comparison. Once people know what you have, they naturally measure it against their own situation. And comparison rarely leads to peace. It can create distance, tension, or quiet jealousy that was never there before. Relationships that once felt simple and genuine begin to feel complicated. That's why keeping your financial life private is not about being guarded. It's about preserving balance. You don't owe anyone a detailed explanation of your situation. You don't need to prove success or justify stability. The less people know, the less they can project, expect, or misunderstand. You can still be generous. You can still support others. But it should come from your decision, not from their awareness of what you have. There's a difference between giving freely and being seen as someone who is always expected to give. So when the topic comes up, it's okay to keep things simple. You're doing fine. You're managing. Nothing more needs to be said. Because once certain details are out in the open, you don't get to control how they're used or interpreted. And if there's one area where people tend to overshare even more without realizing the consequences, it's their pain. Don't broadcast your pain. There's a natural desire to be understood, especially when you're going through something difficult. You want someone to know what you're carrying, how heavy it feels, how much it affects your daily life. And in the right setting, with the right person, that kind of honesty can be healing. But when it becomes something you share with everyone, it can start to work against you. Not because your pain isn't valid, but because not everyone knows how to hold it. People have their own struggles, their own worries, their own emotional limits. And when they're constantly exposed to someone else's suffering, even unintentionally, it can become overwhelming. Instead of bringing people closer, it may slowly push them away. At first, they listen. They respond. They show concern. But over time, the energy shifts. The conversations start to feel heavy. The connection starts to feel like responsibility rather than mutual support. And eventually, some people begin to distance themselves, not out of cruelty, but out of exhaustion. What's even more difficult is how repeated sharing can shape the way others see you. You stop being recognized for your personality, your experiences, your depth. Instead, you become associated with your struggles. The one who is always dealing with something, always in pain, always carrying a problem. And once that image forms, it's hard to change. This doesn't mean you should hide everything or pretend that life is always fine. It means being intentional about where you place your vulnerability. Not everyone needs to hear everything. Not every conversation needs to carry the weight of your inner battles. There's strength in knowing when to speak and when to hold back. There's dignity in choosing not to let your hardest moments define how the world sees you. And there's a kind of quiet resilience in handling certain things privately while still showing up with grace in your interactions. When you do need support, seek it from those who are truly in a position to help, people who understand, who care deeply, who have the capacity to be there for you without judgment or fatigue. That kind of connection is rare, but it's far more valuable than sharing your pain widely and hoping someone will respond the right way. Because not every listener is meant to carry your story, and not every truth needs to be spoken just to feel real. The more you understand that, the more careful you become with what you reveal, especially when it comes to something even more delicate, your past. Keep your past mistakes buried. Everyone has parts of their life they're not proud of. Moments where they made the wrong decision, trusted the wrong person, or became someone they no longer recognize. Time passes, lessons are learned, and you grow into a different version of yourself. That's how life is supposed to work. But growth doesn't erase memory, And it definitely doesn't erase how others might react if they suddenly learn about who you used to be. There's a belief that opening up about your past will set you free. That if you just explain everything honestly, people will understand, accept you, maybe even admire how far you've come. And sometimes, in very specific situations, that can be true. But more often than not, people don't separate your past from your present as clearly as you do. When you tell someone about a mistake you made years ago, they don't experience the time, the context, or the growth that came after it. They hear the action, and they attach it to the person standing in front of them. In their mind, the version of you who made that mistake and the version of you now become the same person. And even if they try not to judge, something shifts. The way they look at you changes, even if it's subtle. What makes it harder is that information rarely stays contained. You might trust one person, thinking the conversation will remain private. But people talk. Not always with bad intentions, sometimes just out of habit or carelessness. And once something personal about your past is shared beyond your control, it spreads in ways you can't manage. What was once a private lesson becomes a public story, often distorted, simplified, or taken out of context. At that point, it's no longer about what actually happened. It's about how it's being perceived. And perception, once formed, is difficult to change. You may have spent years becoming better, making amends, growing into someone more thoughtful and self-aware. But all of that can be overshadowed by a single piece of information that others don't fully understand. This is why not every part of your past needs an audience. Growth is personal. Reflection is personal. Even forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, is something that happens within you, not through the approval of others. You don't need to explain every chapter of your life to prove that you've changed. That doesn't mean you ignore your past or pretend it didn't happen. It means you carry the lesson without carrying the need to announce it. You become better quietly. You move forward without reopening doors that lead to unnecessary judgment. And as you become more aware of this, you also start to understand the weight of something else. What happens when someone trusts you with their story? There's a certain moment in every close relationship where someone decides to tell you something they don't tell anyone else. It could be something painful, something embarrassing, something they've carried for years. And when they share it with you, they're not just sharing information. They're handing you trust in its most vulnerable form. In that moment, what you do next defines who you are more than almost anything else. Protect others' secrets at all costs. It might seem harmless to mention it to someone else, especially if it's someone close to you. You might think you're just talking, just processing, just sharing something that feels heavy. But the moment that secret leaves your mouth, it's no longer under your control. It moves from person to person, changing slightly each time, until it reaches someone who was never meant to hear it. And when it eventually circles back to the person who trusted you, the damage is already done. Trust doesn't break loudly. It doesn't always come with a dramatic confrontation or a clear ending. Sometimes it just disappears quietly. The calls become less frequent. The conversations become more surface level. The openness fades. And you may not even realize when it happened, only that something important is no longer there. What's difficult about breaking trust is that it's almost impossible to fully repair. You can apologize, explain, promise it won't happen again. But the feeling that once existed, that sense of safety, of being able to share without fear, that doesn't come back easily. Once someone sees that their vulnerability wasn't protected, they become more guarded, not just with you, but with others as well. And beyond the relationship itself, there's something else at stake, your reputation. People may not say it directly, but they observe. They notice how you talk about others, what you repeat, what you pass along. And over time, they form an understanding of whether you're someone who can be trusted with sensitive things. If you're known as someone who shares too much, even casually, people will hold back around you. They'll keep conversations light, avoid anything meaningful, and protect themselves by limiting what they reveal. Not because they dislike you, but because they don't feel safe opening up. On the other hand, when you become someone who keeps things to yourself, who listens without spreading, who respects what was shared in confidence, something different happens. People begin to trust you more deeply. They feel comfortable being real around you. And that kind of trust is rare. It's not loud or obvious, but it's incredibly valuable. Protecting someone else's secret isn't just about loyalty to them. It's also a reflection of your own character. It shows discipline, respect, and an understanding that not everything you know needs to be said. When you step back and look at all of this together, a pattern becomes clear. The problems don't usually start with what others do. They start with what we reveal too quickly, too openly, without thinking about the long-term consequences. We share our plans and invite doubt. We share our finances and invite expectation. We share our pain and risk being defined by it. We share our past and invite judgment. We share others' secrets and destroy trust. And then we wonder why things feel complicated, why relationships change, why people behave in ways we didn't expect. But the truth is, every piece of information you give away carries a certain amount of power. Once it leaves you, you no longer control how it's used, how it's interpreted, or how far it travels. That's why learning to hold back isn't about being distant or closed off. It's about being intentional. You don't have to stop being kind. You don't have to stop being open with the right people. You don't have to isolate yourself or pretend that nothing matters. You simply become more aware of where your words go and what they can create once they're out in the world. There's a quiet strength in that awareness. A kind of confidence that doesn't need to be announced. You move differently. You speak less but with more purpose. You listen more, observe more, and choose carefully what deserves to be shared and what is better kept within. And over time, that changes your life in ways that are hard to explain but easy to feel. Fewer misunderstandings. Fewer unnecessary conflicts. Fewer regrets about things you wish you hadn't said. In their place, you gain clarity, stability, and a sense of control that most people never fully develop. At a certain point, you realize that silence is not emptiness. It's not about having nothing to say. It's about knowing that not everything needs to be said. So you begin to guard what matters. Your ideas until they're strong enough to stand on their own. Your finances so they don't distort your relationships. Your struggles so they don't become your identity. Your past so it doesn't overshadow your present. And the trust others place in you, because once that's broken, it rarely returns. Life becomes simpler when you understand this. Not easier, but clearer. You stop trying to explain yourself to everyone. You stop looking for validation in conversations that were never meant to give it. You become more grounded in your own direction, less influenced by outside noise. And maybe the most important shift is this: you start to feel more at peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because you've stopped giving away parts of your life that were never meant to be shared so freely. In the end, it's not about being silent all the time. It's about being wise enough to know when silence serves you better than words ever could.